Imagine a world where your laptop's microchip actually physically mimics human brain cells. Or your city's cellular network acts as this giant invisible radar detecting pedestrians in real time. And the server that's hosting your email is powered by its own miniature nuclear reactor.
Yeah, which sounds entirely made up.
Right, it sounds like a pitch for a sci-fi movie. But when you look at the raw data coming out of the biggest global think tanks today, I mean, that is the literal blueprint of our modern technological landscape.
It really is. It's a massive paradigm shift
Mm.
because for decades we viewed technology as very compartmentalized. You had software over here, you had hardware over there, energy, biology. But what we are seeing in modernity is the absolute collapse of those walls.
Totally.
It is the definition of a converging web. Every single breakthrough we're seeing right now is fundamentally dependent on the others.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We've synthesized these massive, heavyweight reports from McKinsey, the World Economic Forum, Forbes, and a bunch of other analysts. We really wanted to extract the 9 most critical tech trends shaping our world in the present day and, stretching into the near future.
Cutting through the hype.
Exactly. Our goal is to cut straight through the noise. By the end of this conversation, you're going to understand how everything from the AI running on your phone to the future of energy to the very DNA in your body is all connected in this high-stakes global race.
And to really grasp this landscape, we have to start with the brains of the operation. We need to look at how artificial intelligence is evolving to actually take action in the real world, and then the radical new physical hardware that's required to power it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because for the past few years, the only thing dominating the headlines is generative AI. Chatbots, image generators, algorithms that just write essays for you. But looking at the modern data, there is a huge, massive distinction being made between generative AI and what they are calling agentic AI.
Yeah, and that distinction is everything. Generative AI is it's fundamentally passive. You give it a prompt, it gives you a piece of content, and it stops. It waits for you.
Right, it's waiting for the next instruction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But agentic AI refers to autonomous systems that can actually plan, reason, use digital tools on their own, and execute complex multi-step tasks without constant human oversight.
So if you're trying to figure out how this affects your daily workflow, think of it this way. Generative AI is like a really smart intern who drafts a report for you when you explicitly ask.
Yeah.
Agentic AI is the manager who writes the report, realizes it needs more data, searches the web, inputs the new data, emails it to the client, negotiates the contract, and updates your calendar. All while you're just, grabbing coffee.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Agentic AI is built on foundational models, but the mechanism is totally different. It gets granted access to software interfaces APIs.
So it can actually use other software.
Right. It can click buttons, navigate databases, and effectively act as a virtual colleague.
Hmm.
In sectors like logistics and software development, analysts are tracking like 20 to 35% productivity boosts right now.
Wow.
Because these agents are just autonomously managing entire customer relationship management systems.
But wait, I have a major hang up here. These AI models require massive server farms. They're constantly crunching data.
Oh, yeah. Huge amounts of power.
Right. So if we deploy an army of virtual colleagues executing millions of autonomous tasks every single second, aren't we just going to melt the global power grid? How do we physically run this without consuming all the world's electricity?
You've hit on the exact bottleneck of modern computing. The fundamental architecture of the computer chips we've used for decades is, well, wildly inefficient for AI. They process information sequentially, one step at a time. And more importantly, they have separate physical areas on the chip for memory and processing. So to do any math at all, a traditional chip has to constantly shuttle data back and forth between memory and the processor.
Which takes time and burns a ton of energy, I'm assuming.
Huge amounts of energy. It's called the von Neumann bottleneck. So to solve this, the hardware industry is moving toward neuromorphic computing.
Neuromorphic.
Right. These are microchips that completely throw out that old rulebook and are physically designed to mimic the actual neural structure of the human brain.
I'm struggling to visualize this, honestly. If they act like brains, are they like biological or just silicon arranged differently?
They're still silicon, but they use an architecture called spiking neural networks.
Okay.
So in a traditional chip, a massive clock sends signals constantly, meaning power is just always flowing. But in your biological brain, your neurons aren't constantly firing all the time.
Right, that would be exhausting.
Exactly. They sit quietly. They only fire or spike when a specific threshold of relevant information forces them to act.
Ah, so they only use power exactly when and where a calculation is happening.
Exactly. The memory and the processing are intertwined physically, just like synapses in a brain. Because of this, neuromorphic chips process information in parallel and only draw power in these tiny bursts.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and researchers are seeing up to a 100,000 times improvement in energy efficiency over traditional chips, like the Intel Lodi chip, for example.
100,000 times. That's the difference between a little pocket flashlight and a stadium floodlight.
It's insane, but it's literally the only way we can take incredibly powerful agentic AI and put it onto mobile devices, drones, edge sensors.
Without draining the battery in 5 minutes.
Exactly.
So neuromorphic chips mimic the human brain to save power and handle our daily AI tasks. But what happens when we run into problems that are so complex that the human brain and our best neuromorphic chips can't even comprehend them?
Right, like modeling the universe or discovering new complex chemicals.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that requires entirely new physics. And that brings us to the quantum leap. Quantum technologies actually harness the fundamental, totally bizarre rules of quantum mechanics.
Okay, I have to stop you because every time someone explains quantum computing, they use that analogy of a coin spinning in the air.
Oh, the heads and tails at the same time thing.
Yes, being heads and tails at the same time. And frankly, it never actually helps me understand how it solves a math problem.
Fair enough. Let's ditch the spinning coin. Let's think of a complex problem as an enormous, complicated maze.
Okay.
If you send a classical computer into that maze to find the exit, it has to run down every single path, hit a dead end, turn around, and try the next one at a time. It's incredibly fast, but it is sequential.
Right. It checks A, then B, then C.
Exactly. A quantum computer uses qubits, which operate in a state of superposition. Instead of running down one path at a time, superposition allows the quantum computer to essentially flood the entire maze with water all at once.
Oh.
Yeah, it explores every single possible path simultaneously.
So it's not actually calculating faster, it's calculating everything at once.
Exactly. And it links these qubits together through a property called entanglement. When qubits are entangled, the state of one instantly determines the state of another, no matter how far apart they are physically.
So they share information instantaneously.
Right. Google actually built a quantum processor called Sycamore that solved this ridiculously complex computational problem in about 5 minutes. If you gave that exact same problem to the most powerful classical supercomputer on Earth, it would take 10 septillion years.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, but I have to push back a little here.
Sure.
10 septillion years is a super fun number for theoretical physicists. But is this just like lab coat hype? When does a flooded maze actually hit a regular person's daily life?
It's actually already hitting reality through what analysts call hybrid systems. Classical computers are still running the show, right? But they're handing off the most impossibly complex math problems to quantum chips and taking the answers back.
Oh, so they work together.
Yeah, for example, pharmaceutical giants like Merck are using this right now for drug discovery.
How so? Like, what is the quantum chip doing?
Well, to create a new drug, you have to understand how very complex molecules bind together. Simulating every possible molecular interaction would take a classical computer centuries to map out.
Right, because of the maze.
Exactly. But a quantum computer can simulate that chemical maze instantly. It drastically cuts down the research and development times for life-saving therapies.
That is incredible. But to make this work on a global scale, you need an infrastructure capable of transmitting all this instantaneous data.
A huge pipeline.
Yeah, and the data points to this massive transition in connectivity from 5G advanced moving towards 6G. And reading through this report, I realized this isn't just about downloading a movie to your phone a few seconds faster.
Not at all. The true leap in 6G is a concept called integrated sensing and communication, or ISAC. Right. Traditionally, a cellular network just transmits data from a tower down to a phone. But with ISAC, the network itself acts as a massive environmental sensor.
Wait, the cell network acts like a radar? How does it even work?
Think about how a bat uses echolocation. It sends out a sound, and when that sound bounces off a moth, the bat knows exactly where the moth is.
Right.
Well, 6G uses extremely high-frequency radio waves. As those waves bounce around a city, they hit objects, cars, buildings, people. The 6G network is inherently designed to analyze how those radio waves reflect and distort.
So an autonomous vehicle wouldn't just rely on its own physical cameras anymore.
No, wouldn't have to.
The entire city's network is literally whispering to the car, telling it that, based on radio wave reflection, there's a pedestrian running around a blind corner.
Exactly. It reduces latency by like 90%. It creates this hyper-fast, zero-delay global nervous system. So, okay, now we've built the Agentic AI brains, the quantum processing power, and the 6G nervous system.
Which brings us to a huge logical leap. We have these massive, invisible digital systems. How do they physically interact with our real world? And conversely, how do we step into theirs?
Yeah, the physical interface.
Let's look at immersive reality, or XR, and the future of humanoid robotics.
Immersive reality covers virtual, augmented, and mixed reality. For a long time, it was kind of dismissed as a gimmick for video games. Yeah.
Just big clunky headsets for gaming.
Right. But spatial computing is now heavily deployed in enterprise and medical fields.
The medical applications really stood out to me in the sources. There are case studies from the Cleveland Clinic using XR for PTSD therapy, and they are seeing a 30% reduction in symptoms.
Yes, because spatial computing allows for highly controlled exposure therapy. You can place a patient in a virtually immersive environment that triggers their anxiety, but you monitor their biometric response in real time.
So they're slowly retraining their neuroplasticity in a totally safe space.
Exactly. And on the commercial side, companies like Sephora are using augmented reality to map a user's face with pinpoint accuracy for virtual makeup try-ons. And that's bumping sales conversions up by 10%.
So XR is the tool that allows human beings to seamlessly enter the digital realm to learn, train, and heal.
Right. But the flip side of that equation is robotics. If XR brings humans into the digital world, robotics brings AI into the physical world.
So XR is us stepping into the computer's world to heal or learn, and humanoid robots are the computers stepping into our world to do the heavy lifting.
That is the perfect synthesis.
Yeah.
And we're moving way, way beyond those stationary, dumb robotic arms welding cars in a 1990s factory.
The ones behind cages.
Yeah. We're entering the era of collaborative robots, or cobots, and fully autonomous humanoids like the models from Figure AI.
What makes them collaborative, exactly? Just that they aren't bolted to the floor.
It's the sensors and the AI integration. A traditional robot will swing its arm from point A to point B no matter what is in the way. If a human is standing there, it's a fatal accident. Cobots have advanced force feedback sensors and computer vision. If they lightly bump into something unexpected, they instantly stop. Because they are integrated with Agentic AI, they can actually perceive an unstructured environment, watch a human perform a task, and literally learn to mimic it.
The scale of this deployment is just wild. The industrial data shows that China is currently installing 54% of all new industrial robots globally.
It is a massive wave of physical automation.
54%?
Yeah, and it heavily reduces workplace injuries by taking over dangerous, repetitive tasks. But I mean, it is an undeniable threat to human employment and logistics and manufacturing. We are looking at a near future where autonomous humanoids are navigating warehouses, hospitals, and eventually residential homes.
Okay, let's step back for a second because this is where the web truly converges. If we are engineering machines that mimic human brains with neuromorphic chips and mimicking human bodies with autonomous robotic.
The next logical step in the research is how we are re-engineering human biology itself.
Bioengineering.
Yes. We are taking the sheer computational power of AI and the precision of modern mechanics and applying them to synthetic biology. By using machine learning to map genomics, we've moved from simply reading human DNA to actively editing it.
The standout technology here is CRISPR-Cas9. The basic explanation is always that it acts like molecular scissors. But how is it actually that precise? How does a microscopic chemical know exactly which part of a human genome to cut?
It relies on something called guide RNA. You can actually program this guide RNA in a lab to match the exact genetic sequence of the specific disease, say a mutated gene.
Okay.
You introduce it into the body, and it patrols the DNA until it finds the exact matching sequence. Once it docks there, the Cas9 protein acts as the scissors, physically cutting the DNA strand at that exact location.
And then what? Doesn't cutting DNA, damage it?
Well, the human body naturally wants to repair broken DNA. When the cell swoops in to fix the break, Scientists can introduce a healthy, corrected genetic sequence for the cell to use as the blueprint for the repair.
That is staggering, and the clinical trial data completely backs up how revolutionary this is.
Mm.
I mean, they are using this mechanism for severe genetic disorders like sickle cell anemia, and they are seeing a 95% success rate in trials.
95%, it's incredible.
It's effectively a cure for a previously lifelong disease just by finding the typo in the human code and fixing it.
And it extends way beyond human medicine. We are seeing the 3D bioprinting of actual tissue to potentially end transplant waiting lists.
Renting organs.
Literally. We're also seeing metabolic engineering, where scientists design synthetic bacteria with custom metabolic pathways so they literally consume environmental pollution, or sustainably ferment proteins to feed livestock.
But I imagine rewriting the code of life isn't without massive risk.
Oh, absolutely. What's fascinating here is the profound ethical risk. The exact same mechanism that can cure sickle cell anemia or carbon emissions can theoretically be used by a bad actor to engineer a pathogen with devastating precision.
That's terrifying.
There is also the societal risk. If life-extending genetic therapies cost millions of dollars, we could see a literal biological divide based on wealth. It demands a level of global ethical regulation we've never successfully navigated before.
So what does this all mean? When I look at this whole picture, it feels terrifyingly fragile.
Yeah.
We have agentic AI, quantum hybrids, humanoid factories, and bioengineering labs. But all of these require astronomical amounts of energy to run, and they create an unprecedented attack surface for cyber threats. Are we just building a digital house of cards for you to live in?
Energy and security are absolutely the two ultimate roadblocks. Let's tackle energy first. The data points straight to a renaissance in advanced nuclear technology to power this future.
Specifically, small modular reactors, or SMRs. The reports show companies like Microsoft are actively pursuing advanced nuclear energy just to power their AI data centers and hit net zero emissions targets.
Right.
But how is an SMR different from the massive nuclear plants we built in the 1980s?
Traditional plants were multi-billion-dollar, custom-built mega projects that took decades to construct. SMRs are exactly what the name implies. Modular.
So they're smaller.
Much smaller. They are small enough that the components can be standardized, mass manufactured in a factory, and literally shipped on a truck to a location.
And they provide what the industry calls baseload energy.
Right. Wind and solar are fantastic, but they are intermittent. If the wind isn't blowing, you don't get power. Baseload energy means a consistent, massive baseline of power that runs 24 hours a day, regardless of the weather. SMRs provide that with zero carbon emissions.
But the true holy grail of energy mentioned in the research isn't just better fission, it's nuclear fusion.
Yes. Fission, which is what we do now, splits heavy atoms apart, which creates radioactive waste. Fusion attempts to replicate the process that powers the sun.
Which sounds incredibly intense.
It takes light atoms, like hydrogen isotopes, and forces them together under extreme heat and pressure to form helium.
And combining them releases a massive amount of energy.
A virtually limitless amount of energy. And its byproduct is just harmless helium with no long-lived radioactive waste. It is incredibly difficult to sustain the reaction, but it is the long-term horizon solution the tech ecosystem is banking on.
But even if we have limitless power, the more interconnected this web becomes, the more vulnerable it is. The same agentic AI that cures disease is being weaponized by hackers right now to launch automated, hyper-sophisticated cyber attacks that adapt to firewalls in real time.
This is exactly why the security landscape is drastically shifting towards zero-trust architecture. In the old days, cybersecurity was like a castle moat. Once you got past the firewall, you were trusted and you could roam around the network.
Which is how massive data breaches happen. One compromised password and they steal everything.
Exactly. Zero trust removes the moat entirely. It assumes the network is already compromised from the start. It requires continuous algorithmic verification of every single digital interaction, every packet of data, even from users already inside the system.
And the quantum threat makes this even more urgent. A quantum computer could theoretically use that flooded maze processing power to guess modern encryption keys instantly.
Breaking every bank transaction and state secret on Earth.
Which is driving the race for post-quantum cryptography. But what actually is post-quantum cryptography? Is it just, like, longer passwords?
No, it's entirely new math. Current encryption relies on factoring giant prime numbers, something classical computers are terrible at. but quantum computers are great at. Post-quantum algorithms rely on complex mathematical structures called lattice problems.
Lattice problem.
Yeah, it's like hiding a secret inside a multidimensional grid that even a quantum computer's superposition can't easily unravel.
But despite all this advanced math and AI defense, the data highlights something incredibly grounding. Almost half of the solution to modern cybersecurity isn't a new algorithm. It's human-centric training.
Yes, 40% of it. Building systems that are secure by design, establishing strict regulatory frameworks, and literally just training employees not to click malicious links. The human element remains our strongest shield and our weakest link.
So, if we connect this to the bigger picture, who is actually pulling the strings on this global stage?
If we look at the modern geopolitical chessboard, it is deeply divided by specialty. You have the United States largely leading in venture capital, software innovation, and the development of those foundational AI models.
Right.
Then you have China dominating in physical manufacturing scale, clean energy supply chains, and industrial robotics deployment. And then you have the European Union positioning itself as the global standard for ethical regulation, compliance, and establishing the legal frameworks to manage all these risks.
For you listening to this, the core takeaway is that being well-informed today means understanding that none of these trends exist in isolation. You can't separate the AI from the neuromorphic chip, or the chip from the nuclear grid, or the global network from your own biological health.
They are completely intertwined.
They are a singular, converging web that will redefine your career, your privacy, and your day-to-day life.
And this raises an important question, one that brings all of this full circle. As neuromorphic chips begin to flawlessly mimic the human brain, and humanoid robotics learn to walk our streets, and as synthetic biology allows us to edit our own DNA with the precision of software code,
Yeah.
the ultimate trend isn't just about building better tools. If our technology is becoming increasingly biological, and our biology is becoming increasingly technological, at what point in the future does the tool end and the human begin?
That is a staggering thought, because when those neat little boxes we used to put technology in finally disappear and the digital world becomes a living, breathing part of our physical environment, maybe we realize we were just building a mirror all along. Something for you to mull over until next time.